Hello, this is Thomas K4SWL, and if you're new here, I like to do real-time, real-life amateur radio field activation videos. And today is a little different. I just finished a summit activation. I'm hiking back to the trailhead, or to my car, and the thought entered my head that I really wanted to talk about a topic that I've been asked about a lot lately. And, you know, in the world of amateur radio, there are people who have kind of, I don't know, binary thinking. You'll go somewhere and people will tell you, oh, this is a big one. They'll say, don't bother with QRP. QRP doesn't work. Use QRO. You know, life's too short for QRP. You won't be able to work any stations. You'll be operating with your hands tied behind your back. They'll tell me all kinds of things like that. When I have had amazing luck with QRP throughout my lifetime. So I'm not looking at it from a lab point of view, like a workbench point of view, where you look at the numbers, you look at the radiation pattern of different antennas and the power output and propagation maps. I'm just taking it out and trying it, and it seems to work for me. I've never had an issue working QRP. In fact, the more I work QRP, the more I realize, especially in field situations, there's hardly any need ever to run anything over 5 watts with CW or 10 watts with single sideband. It's, you know, if you're doing a field activation, you are the DX, so you just don't really need it. So I apologize in advance. Even though I'm going downhill, it is really humid today. So you're going to hear me huffing and puffing a little bit, and hopefully I won't get lost. I'll follow the trailblazes here as I head down. But I wanted to have a hike and talk about another binary thing that comes up. I remember when the ICOM IC705 was first released, I posted a product announcement about it, and a whole bunch of people came in and said, I don't want it. It doesn't have an internal ATU. I will not have a field radio without an internal antenna tuner. And I have to admit, I was a little surprised the C705 didn't have an antenna tuner built into it, because a lot of its modern competitors do. But, hey, ICOM had to make a choice. I'm guessing that they were looking at the overall cost of it for what they were packing in that radio, and they did pack in a lot of stuff. And they decided that they just didn't want to add an ATU to that mix to make the radio bigger, more complicated, that sort of thing. So they didn't. And me, yeah, I would have preferred that it keep its same form factor and have an ATU built in, but it's not a game changer. It's not a killer. It's not a product killer for me. I'm very happy to buy it without an antenna tuner. Then there are people that will tell you, you don't need an antenna tuner, just use resonant antennas. They're just way more efficient and effective. And if you have one, you don't need, you just don't need an antenna tuner if you've got a resonant antenna that works well. And they have a point. And you could, and I'm saying this saying, then I actually use resonant antennas and non-resonant antennas. I use ATUs sometimes, and sometimes I don't use ATUs. So I'm not a binary thinker. I kind of try everything. And I don't have, whatever works, that's what I use. I don't look at what other people say and have that make a decision for me. I just try it out. And I would argue that you should do the same thing. Even with what I'm saying here today, try it for yourself. See if it works. If it doesn't work, hey, you know, try something different. So with that in mind, I thought I'd talk a little bit about resonant versus non-resonant antennas, and very specifically about antenna tuners. Should you buy one or not? Are they necessary or not? To talk about the ATUs, though, I first really should talk a little bit about resonant antennas. And I'll tell you here, I'm not doing this as a radio engineer. In fact, farthest thing from it. Like I said, these are all from my own personal observations of using things over the years, because I'm not an engineer. I don't understand, you know, a lot of the journal articles about antennas. They go over my head. I build stuff, I buy stuff, I use it. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And I kind of form my decision, my opinions based on that. So resonant antennas, hypothetically, if you have a resonant antenna, you don't need an antenna tuner. And it's very true. I've done lots and lots of SOTA and POTA activations without an antenna tuner, just using a resonant antenna. One of my favorite resonant antennas, and probably two of the most popular ones. My favorite is the infrared half wave, because it's just so easy to deploy. Those typically operate on 40, 20, and 10 meters, sometimes 15 meters. And another one I like is the linked dipole. Those are very effective antennas, and they will serve you very well. So the great thing about resonant antennas, as I said, you don't need an ATU to operate them. You just hook them straight up to your radio via a cable, usually, and start operating. So if it's made for 40 and 20 meters, you may have to change a setting. You may have to, change links in a link dipole, for example. An in-fed half-wave, you don't even have to do that. They're naturally resonant on those harmonics. So 40 meters I can operate. I can switch to 20 meters and operate. I never need to use an ATU. I'll get a really good SWR the whole time, and it's wonderful. I tend to use resonant antennas when I know propagation is going to be poor. And lately, that's actually been a lot. Today I didn't, actually, but hand propagation was supposed to be poor today, but it worked out pretty well. And my thought on it is, it's a little more efficient. It should catch a few more fish, right? So I'll do that. Resonant antennas are also great for using at your home, because at home, you can set up your antenna in a very kind of controlled environment. You're not deploying it every single time in a different way. You're putting it up, you're keeping it up, and you invest in making a really good antenna for your home. And so I'm a big believer in having a resonant antenna or two in your antenna arsenal at home. They're easy to make. You can make 20, 17 meter dipoles that'll just do amazing things. In the field, like I said, there are some really good options as well with in-fed half waves and link dipoles. But even though you have a resonant antenna in the field, I still use an antenna tuner sometimes. And so let's talk about antenna tuners. What are they exactly? Well, without getting into a whole different side conversation, antenna tuners aren't really tuning your antenna. They are finding a match, which is a reason why kind of an old school way of talking about an antenna tuner is a transmatch. It is matching the impedance of your antenna to your transceiver. It makes your transceiver happy with the antenna. So if I took a resonant antenna for 40, 20, and 10 meters, I hooked it up to my transceiver and started operating it on, say, 30 meters, I may get a really high SWR rating, standing wave ratio. And especially at higher powers, I could probably damage my finals. The transceiver would be unhappy, things could heat up, you could get RF back, all kinds of things can happen when you run a really high SWR. Doesn't mean your signal's not getting out, but your transceiver's not happy. You put an ATU in the mix, and you find a good match, and all of a sudden, your transceiver's happy. Your antenna may not be much more efficient on that out-of-band frequency, but it'll operate, and your transceiver will be happy. So, an antenna tuner, if I'm operating a resonant antenna, could still come in handy. And let me explain why. So basically, antenna tuners, to answer your question kind of in advance, should you buy an antenna tuner? I would say yes. Are they necessary? No, they're not. They're not necessary. But I do think they're a bit like carrying a first aid kit when you go on a hike. You know, most of your hikes, you're not going to get injured and need a first aid kit, but you take it along just in case. And you can think about an ATU that way as well. So the big advantages of using an antenna tuner, even if you're using resonant antennas, an antenna tuner will allow you to take, first of all, it gives you frequency agility, right? That's what I call it. I don't know if that's actually the term for it or not, but it gives you the ability to move off of the resonant frequencies. So, for example, I can't tell you how many times I've hopped out to a park or a summit on a weekend only to find out there's a contest going on. My in-fed half waves all are resonant on 40 and 20 meters, and those are two of my favorite bands for doing portable operation. And, you know, those bands will be chock full of contesters. Now, I could go out and just work the contest stations and, you know, call them or whatever and still make my activation, but that's not what it's about. When I go out to activate a summit, I like to open up that summit to summit chasers. So I like to do it kind of the traditional way. If I'm just doing it for me only, then yeah, I could work some of those contest stations, because neither Summits on the Air, nor Parks on the Air, nor Worldwide Florafauna, none of them require that you're only communicating with other in-network ham radio operators. But I like to do a traditional summit activation. So what I'll do with my 40-20-10 in-fed half-wave is use my antenna tuner to move me to the WARC bands. That's W-A-R-C. And you can look that up. I can't remember what the acronym stands for right now, but basically it's the 30, 17, and 12 meter bands. 30 and 17 being usually the most useful, especially this time of the solar cycle. And I move to those bands, and it's nice and quiet. Actually, it's not quiet. Usually when there's a contest going on, all of the non-contesters move to those bands. And that's where all the park and summit activations will happen. If you look at spots during contests, they all move to those WARC bands. So it's actually kind of a nice place to hang out and play if you're doing a park or a summit activation. So again, an ATU will offer you that frequency agility that you might not otherwise have. Another thing that's happened to me is I remember during Parks on the Air, or National Parks on the Air program in 2016, I hiked to a ridge line to activate, I think it was the Blue Ridge Parkway. And I really wanted to do the activation from this ridge line near the parkway. And I got to the top, and I had my 40-20-10 trail-friendly, EFT trail-friendly par infeds antenna. Very first commercial field antenna I'd ever bought. And I forgot to bring my throw line, or a line to put it up in a tree. And on top of that, the trees were very short, much shorter than I thought they would be. They were just kind of like really tall shrubs. And it had been raining the day before. And it was very, very damp up on top of the hill. Well, I wasn't going to not do the activation. I really had made up my mind I was going to do it up there. So I took the EFT trail-friendly antenna, I did a figure 8, and I tossed it over the tallest small tree I could find. It was touching every branch on that tree, and the tree was wet. When I hooked it up to my KX2, it would not get a good match. And so what I did was I used the antenna tuner to make the transceiver happy, and I was able to do my activation. And that worked out really well, actually. Let me double check this. I think that's it. Lake parking area, Cook's Wall Trail to campground. Yeah, this is where I'm going. Glad I checked that. So I was able to, hop on and work. Now, having an antenna that is draped over a tree is not ideal, and it wasn't efficient. But I easily snagged my park. In fact, I remember that day having quite a pileup at one point, which really surprised me. And it wasn't because the antenna was that great. There was no magic sauce in that. It just happened to be a good day with reasonable propagation. And so it worked out. Had I not had an antenna tuner built into my KX2, I probably would not have been able to make that park activation because I couldn't find a resonant. It just wouldn't resonate anywhere. I kind of threw off the dynamics of that antenna by tossing it over a small wet tree. So that's another thing. And I've also had antennas that, and this is kind of a first aid kit sort of point of view with an antenna tuner. I have a 40-30-20 in-fed antenna made by PAR. Actually, it's by Vibraplex now. Designed to work with the MTR-3B little CW transceiver. And it's a genius little antenna. It's pretty small for an in-fed, maybe 60-some feet. But one day I deployed it, and as I was pulling it out of the tree, it got snagged, and it broke near the trap further up the radiator line. I was able to retrieve the end of the antenna, and so I took it home. This is after the activation. Took it home, fixed it, and I thought it'd probably work fine. So the next activation I went out, and it was no longer resonant on any of those frequencies. And I was really disappointed. And it was the only antenna I brought with me that day. to use. And I think, again, I had my Elecraft KX2 with me. I think that's the radio I had. So I just employed the ATU, took it out of bypass mode, had it find a match, and boom, I was on the air. And I actually used that antenna 3 more times after that, I think, because I was doing a little multiple park trip. And it worked great. It wasn't as efficient as it would have been, and there were obvious issues with it if it couldn't get a match on anything, but the antenna tuner allowed my transceiver to kind of pair with it and make it work for what it's worth, and I got it on the air. So think of it as like a little first aid kit for field operation. So another reason I like the kind of, if you were raised in the 80s in the United States, you may know about this. I like the MacGyver effect of it. Basically, your ability to use it as a means of hacking together an antenna. And I remember once, I think this is with my Elecraft KX3, I went to do a park activation in West Virginia. And as I left, I realized that I didn't have an antenna with me. Not one that was functioning. There was an issue with one I'd forgotten about, and it really needed a repair, not one I could do in the field. So at the last moment, because I was behind, I just grabbed a big box full of parts. Everybody has a parts box. And I usually label this thing antenna wire and stuff, antenna parts. And it's out in my shed. I grabbed that, I threw it in my car, and I took off. I didn't know what was in it. I had no clue. I got to the park, and I cobbled together with BNC binding posts. I cobbled together an antenna with some discarded wire that I linked together, and I made, I think, 31 feet of it or something. And I had enough to make that radiator. I actually didn't have a spool of wire that I was expecting in there, so I had to kind of piece it together. And then I had like a 10-foot section of ladder line. And I don't mean like full-size ladder line, but like more like the window ladder line everybody uses. So I took that ladder line. I didn't want to just chop it up and make 2 long lengths and then tie them together. So I just tied the ends of one side and hooked it up to the ATU. And so kind of effectively I had 20 feet of line, but since it was spaced the way it was and everything, it probably didn't act like that. But it coupled to the ground just fine and worked out really well. And I made my activation no problem at all. So my ATU really came to the rescue. I would have had a hard time making a resonant antenna out of that. So that's the reason why I say that you should consider getting an ATU. Antenna tuners are manual or automatic. It used to be that all of them were manual. You can build them. There are lots of homebrew articles out there for building them. There are some wonderful kits available too. They're very affordable. One of my favorites is the MTech ZM2 balance line tuner. I love that antenna tuner. It's one of my favorite manual ones. Sorry, I just passed by some more people, so I put down the camera. MFJ makes a nice line of manual antenna tuners and automatic antenna tuners. But if you want, so manual antenna tuners, you find them at yourself. And once you've done it a little bit, it's really not that hard. There's a little tiny learning curve to it, but not much of one. Automatic antenna tuners, you basically press a button and it finds the match for you. And that's not always really the method for doing that, but they're usually very easy and they automatically find a match for you. And they're very handy. And most people use those today, to be honest. MFJ makes some affordable ones. LDGs are very affordable and excellent antenna tuners. One of my favorite portable antenna tuners is the Elecraft T1. That's a great one. But there are loads of companies making these. There are a lot of homebrew projects and kits. And you can spend anywhere from like, I don't know, a little over $50 for a kit for a manual one, to maybe like $150 for a nice LDG automatic antenna tuner, up to, if you want to, $350 for the new ICOM AH705. There's a wide range of antenna tuners out there. But I think that you ought to consider investing in one. I think it's just a handy thing to have if you operate radio a lot. So now, having talked about antenna tuners, let's talk about what I'm going to call non-resonant antennas. It's probably not the right term for it. It's just the way I would call them. basically antennas that require an antenna tuner to operate. They're designed with the idea of pairing it with an antenna tuner. So these are usually like random wire antennas or verticals that require an ATU to find a match. So some of the ones you'll see in my videos have random wire antennas that are just wire. I have some with like 9-to-1 unins on them. I have like Chameleon Impasse Lite and Chameleon Impasse 2.0 that are verticals that operate everywhere from 160 meters to 6 meters. Why would you want a non-resonant antenna when a resonant antenna is so efficient and effective? Well, it tends to be that these non-resonant antennas are designed around being compact, very portable, very easy to deploy. A lot of companies invest to make them really rugged. And if your radio already has an antenna tuner built in, it kind of makes sense to have one of these along. Random wire antennas, for example, like most of the ones I have will operate anywhere from 60 meters up to 6 meters, every single meter band in between, and can easily find matches on those. That's really, really, really handy. And not only that, with an automatic antenna tuner, I can make the match very quickly. So it's no skin off my back to move from 17 meters to 20 meters to 40 meters to 60 back up. It comes in really handy if you're in a park and you're chasing another park, or you're on a summit and you're chasing another summit. That comes in super handy because you can go all over the place. And that's another thing, if you've got a resonant antenna and you don't have an ATU and you want to chase a summit and you're on a summit to do a summit to summit and they're on 30 meters, you may just be out of luck. But if you have an antenna tuner, you can probably take your resonant antenna off band onto that 30 meter band. But non-resonant antennas, like my speaker wire antenna, for example, it doesn't even have any kind of transformer in it, nothing. It's just speaker wire, 28.5 feet, and it relies on the antenna tuner to find the match. And if you have a wide range antenna tuner, it'll do it. If you don't, it might struggle. But all the ones I use, like the one with the X5105, the Elecraft KX2, KX3, and the Elecraft T1 antenna tuner, and probably my LDG Z100 Plus and the MAT 705 Plus. I think I've used almost all of those now with that speaker wire antenna, and they find matches just fine. So they're wide range enough. Most modern automatic antenna tuners are fine with those. And so yeah, the speaker wire is really compact. It's really cheap, gets you on the air. And you'll hear people say, you know, use an efficient antenna because you want to get the most out of your QRP wattage. Well, I kind of, and this is probably a horrible analogy, in my head I think of it as fishing. And I imagine I'm a fisherman and I am going to go out and catch enough fish for dinner for my family, my friends. We're having a big party. Maybe I need to catch 20 fish. So I head out in my boat and I've got 2 different nets I can use. I know that my little handheld net, that I could stick it in the water next to the boat, put it in the water a little bit as I'm going along, and I'll probably catch groups of 15 fish at a time, and probably can easily get 30 fish, 40 fish with that handheld net. Or I could deploy a really large net and catch 200 fish, no problem. Well, the bigger net takes longer to deploy, takes longer to pack up, and maybe, just maybe, I don't even want that many fish because maybe I've got a limited amount of time to go catch those fish before I need to cook them. And this happens to me on activations. I find that there's a sweet spot. Summit activations, you need 4 contacts to have a valid activation. Park activations, you need 10 to have a valid park activation. I usually do not have any issues getting those. It's really not that difficult. And so when I go to a summit like I was just on, I was using a 31-foot random wire antenna by Pactenna, actually. I was using the Pactenna 9-to-1 Unin. And I had constant pileups on 20 and 17 meters. It was a little insane, actually. And so if I was using a more effective antenna, hypothetically, I could have even attracted more people. But I was struggling just to keep up with the contacts I was getting in because they were all coming in at the same time as the pileup. So I do fine with a small net. I don't need a big net. That Pactenna I can pack up in just like no time at all. It's so incredibly easy to do. Let me make sure I don't get lost here. Let's see what this sign says. Lake parking area. Yeah, good. Okay, I'm on the right path. So, yes, I use non-resonant antennas, and I enjoy them. And I think you ought to have one in your trail kit as well. There's no reason why you couldn't put those on the air, and you'll find that they are more effective than you think they would be, especially if you're doing a park or a summit activation where you essentially are the DX. People are listening for you. You're not trying to bust through big pileups. People are trying to bust through to get to you. And that makes a really big difference when you're activating. Once I accidentally activated with something like 0.3 watts out. And it was a little slow going, but I easily got my activation. I didn't realize my transmitter was set to such a low power output, but I was tinkering around with it the day before. And I worked people all over with that. Although hypothetically, it should have been very difficult. So just try things, see if they work. In practice, you find that you get a lot more done than you can in theory. So, yeah, should you buy an antenna tuner? I think so. Do you need one? You don't have to have one, but they come in really handy. Use resonant antennas and use non-resonant antennas if you can. If you have an ATU, give them a go. They're very handy, and you can build them yourself very easily. So give it a try. Anyway, I hope this wasn't too rambly. I'm not operating from notes. I'm hiking. But I wanted to get this off my chest. A lot of people have been asking about it, and I thought I'd just kind of give a quick answer, which turned out not to be so quick. And thank you for following along. You can get a little award for making it to the end of this video. I'm getting closer and closer to the parking place, which would be really nice. And off to my next park. I'm going to go for Pilot Mountain State Park next. I think I can fit it in this afternoon. And thank you for coming along on this hike. If you like what you see here, I'm sorry. Something's wrong with you probably. But I appreciate it. And I appreciate all the kind comments. If you feel like it, subscribe. If not, don't worry about it. And thank you so much for coming along, and 7 threes.